Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. It is episode number 59, and we are back to talk about Inter Miami. Some news from this week, both injury related, coming back and going on the injured list. And of course, we're going to spend the majority of this episode talking about Inter Miami and their place in the larger FIFA ecosphere, and specifically with Europe, because the European calendar has just restarted. And I think there's a lot of fun questions and comments about a lot of the players on this team and what their futures in Europe might look like, or if they have a future, or what the path could be for them. So we figured it was a good time with the start of the season in Europe to have that conversation, and it's been a little bit of a lull. But before all of that, I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur. How you feeling tonight, man?
Always great, man. Whenever I get the opportunity to jump on a podcast with you, it's always a pleasure. And I feel like today's conversation is slightly different. And it's going to be fun. And it's going to be interesting. And it's going to be a good hour. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I think so too. And Lamar says, "What's good? It's good to see you, man." There's a couple notes to talk about. And let's start with Aleo, because earlier this week we found out what happened to Leo Alfonso. He was a surprise inclusion to last week's injury report, missed the game Saturday. We weren't really sure what was happening with him. We find out that he had a sports hernia. He already got the procedure, and he's going to be out for 2 to 3 months. That was confirmed by the club earlier this week. Tough break for a young player that I think has really impressed this season. This is the same injury that Benja Cremaschi had in the offseason, and so it's fairly routine. It's something he will come back from, but just because of the timing, this could mean it's the end of his season, or he might be back sort of as we get into the playoffs. But ultimately, a promising first season for Leo Alfonso, who was a second-round draft pick to become a first-team Inter Miami player.
Dude, I'll be honest, I haven't been on Twitter in a minute. It's been a few days, and this is the first time I'm hearing of this injury, like live from you. So I'm really surprised. Bad loss, man. Really bad loss, especially at this time of the season. He's a very good utility player. He's been playing really well when he gets the chance. That Philadelphia game where he scored the last-minute goal, that's going to be the highlight of his season for sure. And if he's out for 2 or 3 months, that means he's probably not going to make it back in time for the playoffs. Sad times, but you know what? He's done his bit for this season. He's had a good rookie season, and I can't wait to see him get back fit, healthy, and straight back into the team next year whenever he gets the chance.
Yeah, and you'd think that he's a guy that earned a lot of trust and respect this year. And of course, the monumental moment is his game-winning goal against the Philadelphia Union when we were down to 9 men in stoppage time to seal 3 points. And I'm sure we'll do an episode at some point, probably in the offseason, about the games and the moments that kept us alive for the Supporter Shield or for the East or for whatever. And so that is certainly going to rank high on that list. But also, earlier in the season, we had a real injury problem and a depth problem at the wing spot. And it didn't feel like we had a lot of good solutions. And this is sort of how Leo Alfonso was able to break into the first team. And since then, we've seen a lot of Diego Gomez at wing. That wasn't really a factor early in the season. We've seen Julian Gressel be really good at right wing. We've seen Matias Rojas get signed and also, play well at that wing spot. So the need for a winger has certainly diminished. And at the time, we had some injuries for Robert Taylor and Messi too. So we were thin there, not so much anymore. And that's why we haven't seen a ton of Leo Alfonso. But ultimately, he did play an important role for us at certain points in the season and materially affected what our record is and how many points we have right now. So if this is it for his season, it was, I think, an outstanding rookie season for him. And if it's not the end of him, then that means we're going to get him in the playoffs. So we'll see.
Yeah, you mentioned the left wing spot, and I just want to touch on that briefly. Feels like even Robert Taylor isn't able to get into that position anymore. It's weird, and that's what happens when you have your players healthy and available. There's so much competition in this team now.
I'm glad you stopped this, because this wasn't part of what we were going to talk about tonight. But I think there's an interesting talking point here about Robert Taylor, who has been a healthy scratch for the last 3 – healthy did not play for the last 3 games. I was looking back on it, and it did not feel like that has happened for any of the established professionals for most of the season. Even guys like David Ruiz and Noah Allen haven't really had 3 games in a row where they've been a healthy scratch. Guys that you would probably have pictured as guys that would have at this point just because of the depth. It's really just Franco Negri has had it a number of times because just Jordi Alba plays every game.
Yeah.
Aside from that, it hasn't really happened for any of the established guys. Christoph, the guys that are like true senior level players. And so for Robert Taylor, who I think has been in the good graces of the team, just gets the contract extension, to not get any minutes has been a little bit surprising, right? We brought on Christoph in the last few minutes on Saturday night when the game was basically already over. We had a 2-goal lead and it was the 91st minute, something like that. And like he chose Christoph over Robert Taylor. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if Robert Taylor's fighting something, but it has certainly piqued my interest. And I have a second point, but I just wanted to see if you had any response to that.
No, maybe there's one more day left in the European market. Maybe he's heading back to Finland or something. Who knows?
No, I don't think that's happening. But it doesn't bother me because this is what's supposed to happen. Robert Taylor had a few games in a row where he wasn't performing particularly well. He didn't have a huge impact. Not that he was poor or had bad touches, but he just wasn't impacting the game like you want a forward to impact the game. And so you bring in another player, and Diego Gomez has gone into that role and done really well. And so he gets to stay. And that's what a good, healthy competition looks like. And Robert Taylor will get his chance again at some point soon. But that's what you want. And so to compare that to other positions on the field where you don't necessarily get that,
and I know who you're getting into.
Games. Yeah, so there's a dichotomy there that maybe we shouldn't think about too much. But
I will say and end it on this, that the left wing spot is a perfect example of how internal competition within the team should work, right? I'm the biggest fan of Robert Taylor, and I really love him in this team. I think he contributes so much and brings a very unique quality on that wing. But he didn't perform a few games, got replaced by Diego Gomez in that position. And Diego Gomez has been phenomenal since he's come back. So it's going to take some time before Robert Taylor gets back into that position. And I think it's going to happen. We're going to play a lot of games over the next couple of months before the playoffs. Once we have secured our position in the table, once we know we've maybe secured the East, once the Supporter Shield race is potentially done and dusted, we'll have a few games where maybe some of these players might get an opportunity. And I think Robert Taylor is going to eventually get his chance again to prove why he was the starting left wing anyways.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if he started Saturday night against Chicago.
Yeah.
That wouldn't surprise me at all. So, yeah, he'll get his opportunity. It's just comparing that to, say, right back, it's just frustrating. But alas, there we are. And then the major talking point of this week has been the re-emergence to the practice field and to team training of one Lionel Messi, who has been out for a very long time. It has been 6 weeks out because of injury, but another 6 weeks with the Copa America. So it has been almost 3 months since Inter Miami has seen Lionel Messi don the pink and black. It's awesome. It's amazing and everything, right?
You know what? I was having a conversation the other day on the lunch table with a couple of friends who are not really into MLS. And they asked me, who do you think the best team in the MLS is? And my question was, my answer was, Inter Miami is definitely the best on paper. And they're like, yeah, but if Messi wasn't there. And I was like, this is without Messi. Inter Miami is the best team on paper and in terms of their league position without Messi. I can't wait for him to come back, man. It's going to be wild. It's going to be exciting. The energy is going to be palpable. I understand that some fans might have been disappointed with him being out for so long. I think there are going to be a lot more fans in the stadium shouting and chanting his name. And it's just going to be a great, great journey for the rest of the season until we play the playoffs, until we win the MLS Cup and everything in between. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. And I can't wait for him to be back on the pitch, man. I can picture right now him coming on as a substitute in the 45th minute at halftime, We're gonna go wild.
Can you wait 2 more weeks? I mean, so this is something I've been thinking about. I think if Saturday night was a huge game, Messi would be available, but it's not. It's on the road. It's at Chicago, and if he doesn't play, that means he gets another half a month of recovery. And so, part of me thinks it would be awesome to see him, but also just leave him at home for this game. Go get 3 points, and then reintegrate him over the 2-week break, and then have him fit and firing at 110% for the rest of the season, because we can survive without him. And if we can give him another half a month before he has to go full throttle in game action, I think that would be sort of even better, right?
Yeah, that just makes the most sense. Just let him have the 2 weeks off.
There was an article today, and sorry, I'm throwing another curveball at you. It's not in our rundown, but there was an article today by Taylor Twellman, or quoting Taylor Twellman, where he talks about how he expects Inter Miami. Taylor Twellman, very skeptical of Inter Miami this year. He expects Inter Miami to win the Supporters' Shield, and he thinks they have a really good. He actually almost expects them to break the points record. And we've talked about this. They need to get 18 from their final 24 to break the points record, and that certainly feels plausible. But then he said he doesn't see them as the favorite for the MLS Cup because he doesn't think that they have really completed the "we're a dominant team" arc that Inter Miami has to go through. And he actually, or the article, used some interesting advanced stats to show that Inter Miami's actually been much worse than their record would indicate. They haven't been blowing teams out. They haven't been dominating. And so I think this is a really fun, interesting conversation. It is going to be the main topic of our next midweek podcast. But just off the top of your head, Inter Miami, because you mentioned best team on paper, they are likely to win the Supporters' Shield. Certainly the betting favorite. They have a very good chance to break the points record. And yet, if we're talking about them going up against the Columbus Crew, FC Cincinnati, maybe on the road, even though that's probably not going to end up happening, LAFC in a cup title, do you feel like they're the overwhelming favorites? Or do you feel like, no, that's an even game, and you hope it's at home, and you hope that everyone's fit and firing, and you hope that Tata Martino has the right tactics, and you hope that he makes the right in-game adjustments? It doesn't feel like overwhelming favorites yet.
Yeah, I tend to agree with what Taylor Twellman said, and I want to shoot myself in the foot for saying that, but I think he might be onto something. Inter Miami definitely should have the Supporters' Shield locked in. If we lose from this position, it's going to be all on us. But there's a completely other discussion to be had about what the playoff run looks like and what the MLS Cup final looks like. Because if we go up against Cincinnati or Columbus Crew, I'd say it's very even at this point in time. I don't know if you'll ever get that outright domination that we're expecting of Inter Miami, because just the nature of the MLS, the injuries that sometimes happen, not everything goes in your favor. But I still feel like despite Inter Miami playing at an 80%, we still beat teams, man. We've been under the cosh so many times this season, and we still come out victorious. Imagine when everything falls into place.
Yeah,
the question is, does everything fall into place or not?
Yeah, but look who's winning trophies, man. Look who's getting to finals, right?
Yeah.
LAFC just got to the Leagues Cup final, just got to the Open Cup final. The Columbus Crew, CONCACAF Champions Cup final, just won the Leagues Cup, right? And Inter Miami was in, not the Open Cup, but was in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, was in the Leagues Cup, and we went out early because a few things didn't go our way. We had to make a road trip. Some of our players were out, and our coach did not make the right decisions at the right time. So
now there's 100% there's a conversation to be had, and that's why every time someone asks me who's the best team in the MLS, I'll always say Inter Miami on paper, right. And it just needs to translate in the field, and hopefully come playoffs that happens, but you never know.
Yeah, and I didn't even mean to take this conversation this way. This is not where this podcast was going, but probably it'll be a much more in-depth conversation next week when we do the midweek episode, which will be all about Lionel Messi and integrating him back into this team in a way that makes us not just deadly offensively, which we will be if he's on the field, but also sound and structural defensively and have a strong, compact, impactful midfield and play dominating ball instead of trying to outscore opponents in a free-for-all. Let's get to the topic of the day.
Finally.
Yeah, there's a couple U-turns there, but we're there. And the idea for this episode was to acknowledge that the European season has started. The European transfer window closes over the next 24 to 48 hours, something like that, depending on the league. And Inter Miami has a lot of interesting conversations around some of their players and their futures in Europe. And we thought it would be fun to just speculate on what those futures might be. What is the best path for a player to reach their full and true potential? And what do they need to do at Inter Miami in order to earn those moves so that they can play at the highest level that their talent or their potential would dictate? Is there a player that you want to start with? I sort of just wrote a bunch of names down that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't put them in any particular order. So is there one player that you think has an extremely bright future and you think has a very interesting path to get there, that of course starts with being on Inter Miami right now?
Not just one. I think there are a couple of interesting players. You use the word bright. Of course, Yannick Bright's one of them. Cremaschi, I think, definitely has something in store for us. Of course, Diego Gomez, I'm still not sure what the status of his move to Brighton is, whether that's come through or not. Not really sure. Federico Redondo has been pitted to potentially play in Europe at some point. So there are a few players, but why don't we start with Diego Gomez, the one, the only, who's pitted to go to Europe and potentially blow the Premier League away with his talent?
Okay, let's start with Diego Gomez. He is the face of this episode, or at least the face of the thumbnail. And he is the most clear in terms of what his future holds. He is 99.99% going to Brighton. I know that until the ink is dry on the contracts, anything can happen, but this deal has been agreed. The fee's been agreed. The personal terms between Brighton and Diego Gomez's camp have been agreed. This is happening, and he is going to head to the Premier League in January, December, whenever this season ends. I think for Brighton, they would want to make this deal happen now and then just send him on loan, because that would mean he would be eligible to start training with them and having done his physical and science contract, so that as soon as our season ended, he could go to Brighton and start working with the team, even if he wasn't eligible to be registered for games. Hasn't happened yet, but let's just assume it's going to happen this way, whether the deal gets finalized in the next 24 hours or if it gets finalized on January 1st. What are your expectations for Gomez at Brighton and in the Premier League?
I hate Brighton, man. I hate Brighton. Man United lost to Brighton this weekend. It soured my mood. But I'm very happy for Diego Gomez if he goes to Brighton, because it's the best developer club that we have in the Premier League. The Premier League itself is, of course, for me, I watch the Premier League the most. I love the play style and everything there. But in terms of his profile and what he brings to the table, I do think Diego Gomez fits perfectly in the Prem, and Brighton is potentially one of the best clubs that builds up a youngster. I'm not sure if he fits their play style, but we'll see if whatever happens in the next couple of months. But he's so young and he can be molded into such a different player over the course of the next few years. I'm really excited to see what his growth looks like. And I will say there's still a question mark about what his perfect position would be once he moves to the Premier League. Does he play the midfield? Does he play a left wing? I personally have started to prefer Diego Gomez in the left wing spot. So there are a few question marks, but overall, this is the perfect move for him. And I think the perfect league for him to go and develop his skills.
So Diego Gomez is going to Brighton. For those that aren't paying particularly close attention, Brighton has had a monster of a transfer window in terms of spending money, over $200 million on a number of players, including a few central midfielders, such as Matt O'Reilly, who came for £25 million from Celtic. They bought a young player, African player from a Swedish club for £6 million. He's maybe a little bit behind Gomez in terms of his development. And then they brought Mats Wiefer from Feyenoord, who also cost them about 25 million pounds. He's not going to be expected to come in and be a crucial player. They did sell a couple central midfielders like Pascal Grosch to Borussia Dortmund, but he's not going to be expected to come in and be an impactful player, which is good. Right? He's being bought for $15 million, so 12 million pounds. So not expected to come in and be a first team starter, but it seems to me like a player that the scouting department that has been so good, especially with South American prospects, and has flipped guys into major players, saw Gomez and decided this is a guy we have to go out and sign, and we're going to get in contact with Inter Miami right now so we can lay the groundwork for when it is time for him to move on from Inter Miami. We're going to be the team that already has the groundwork laid. He's going to go in January. He's going to join the team, but he's not going to be a guy that has to make a first team impact. Looking back at what happened last summer when he joined Inter Miami in the middle of the season, it felt sometimes like Tata forced him into the starting lineup when he wasn't ready and he wasn't able to make a big impact. And he quickly came back out of the starting lineup in favor of Cremaschi, who did outplay him last year. I think this could be perfect for Gomez. He's going to go in. He's going to have 4 months, 5 months at the tail end of the season where he can be in training every day. He'll get a few minutes off the bench when they need fresh legs. They're playing in Europe. He will be able to get minutes, but not have overwhelming pressure or expectations. And then he'll get that first summer where he'll really be able to integrate into the team and hopefully push, hopefully for him, push for a starting position and to blossom in the ways that I think Brighton sees him having a bright future. I agree with you. I think the Premier League is a perfect league for him. I agree with you. I think Brighton is an excellent team at a club at finding players and then developing them into stars. And so I think it's the perfect situation for Diego Gomez. The fact that we get him for the rest of our season makes this all the way around a perfect transfer, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if we can bring him back on loan for another season, that'd be great as well. Brighton, if you're listening, try and do us a favor. But he has something that's really invaluable for a player in the Premier League, and that's his physicality. I don't think any other player or any other young player that we have on our list today fits into the Premier League style of play, right? But Diego Gomez, with his physicality and with his ability to press high, eat up space, run, that's already so underrated. And he may not be the most prolific player in the Premier League. He may not emerge as this, huge, amazing talent that blows everyone out of the water, silky with his feet, but he's going to do a job. And the fact that he's going to be able to come off the bench, do a job for Brighton, at least in the first couple of seasons that he's there, I don't see him as an immediate starter. He's going to have to earn his place. But the fact that he can actually have that impact of the bench, be a physical monster, either in the midfield or on the sidelines, he's going to really, really be a valuable asset for them. And as we said multiple times already, it's the perfect space for him. And I can't wait for him to show his talent in the Premier League, man. We're going to be rooting for him all the way.
He isn't just a great athlete. He's a good athlete by Premier League standards. So even in that league, which demands incredible athletes and not just like quick or fast, but also big and physical to pair with quick and fast, he has all of those physical tools you could want. He's a body made for the Premier League. And the improvement we've seen from him over the last year has been phenomenal, to the point where you think you put him in that environment, he's just going to absorb everything around him and become a great player. This was the easiest one, and I'm really excited for Diego Gomez. I don't have the disdain that I think you have right now for Brighton, but I'm sure the next time Manchester United lose, it will be a different team that has your ire. But
we're going.
I'm really excited.
Unbeaten, man.
The last question I wanted to talk about for a lot of these guys is, what do you think the ceiling is for Gomez? He's about to turn 22. Well, he's going to turn 22 in March, so he's halfway to 22. He's not 18, 19, so that is something. But it also feels like Brighton is very high, and I don't know if he has the oomph or the top-end technical ability to one day play for Manchester United or Real Madrid or something like that. So what is the ceiling for him? Is Brighton, is that the peak? Is that where he should be for the next 8 years? or like somewhere in that level of Fulham or West Ham, like a club that's competing for a European spot in the Premier League? Or does he have a step above that?
No, I think you nailed it. I think he is the perfect utility player for a mid-tier team, and that's a mid-tier Premier League team, and that's saying a lot. That already in itself is a major compliment. He will be as I mentioned, a valuable asset with his talent and the skills that he brings to the table. I don't think he has as high a ceiling of playing for the elite clubs in Europe, whether that's Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Real Madrid. But he definitely has the skill set to be a dominant force for some of the mid-tier teams, and I think that's where he's going to thrive as well. At some of these bigger clubs, he might become a big fish in a big pond where there are all other big fishes as well. But in a team like West Ham, perhaps, or Fulham, or Southampton, for instance, he's really going to be able to showcase some of his talents and some of the skill set that he has. So for me, I think that's his level, and that in itself is a massive compliment.
I agree. I think that, he's going to go in and be a backup midfielder, but I think he can develop into a starting midfielder at that level. I wonder if there's a future where he's like Mason Mount and he is a player in the Premier League that earns a move to a top 6 club and is not a locked in starter for a top 6 club, but is a, top 5 midfielder for a big 6 club, and is a guy that can get, 20 starts a year on a team that's playing 65 games and end up in like that really, really high tier. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if he takes another step or two, like he did over the last year, I could see that being the case.
I'm not sure if that comparison's correct, but yeah, that could be the case. That the premise that you set up could be actually the case. But we'll see. There's a lot of, ifs and buts.
Okay. So that's the general idea of what we want to do tonight. Talk about some of our young players. What is the path for them to get to the top level? And then what do they need to do at Inter Miami in order to earn that move? And of course, Diego Gomez has already earned the move. Let's go to our next player, and that's Benja Cremaschi. Benja is, unlike Diego Gomez, a thorough academy standout, a kid that is from South Florida that grew up through the Inter Miami Academy and has starred at every level, has made his debut as an 18-year-old, became a starter and a locked-in starter at 18, and has now been a part of this Supporter Shield winning team where he has had real runs of games where he's a starter. I remind you that he just turned 19 a few months ago, and Diego Gomez is about 6 months away from turning 22. So when we talk about comparing these two players, Cremaschi is a long time before he gets to the age that Diego Gomez is. He is way ahead of schedule compared to where Diego Gomez was. So with that in mind, what do you see when you project forward for Benja Cremaschi?
I think Benja still has a little bit of growing up to do, a little bit of maturing to do in terms of his play. He's a really good player. I absolutely adore him as a player. Again, very good asset for this Inter Miami team. I don't think he's at the Premier League level yet. His play style is slightly, yeah, but his play style is slightly clunky, but he does the work. He runs hard. He works hard for the team. He hasn't scored that many goals this season, which is really surprising, or assisted, but he always does the job really, really well. And that brings us back to the same conversation of, you put him in a team that knows how to use his skills and that gives him a job to do, he will do that job.
Can I stop you though? Because sometimes we lose sight of what actually is happening based on the preconceptions we have. Do you think Diego Gomez going forward is like a significantly better player than Benja Cremaschi?
I think in terms of his numbers and output, he has been this season, right?
He has been this season, but it's not a huge
let's put
difference.
it this way. If you see, okay, you have the final third of the pitch. You put Diego Gomez there, or you put Benja Cremaschi there. If you have a choice between the two, who would you want to take the shot and get a goal?
No, this is what I'm saying though, is I don't think it's as big of a difference as maybe it would be common sense to think. right? Cremaschi has almost 10 goals since he got to Inter Miami. He's got the same number of goals as Diego Gomez over the last year and a half, right? So it's actually not that big of a difference.
Let me put it this way. I think for Benjamin Cremaschi to deserve a move out of Inter Miami to Europe, he needs to be a little bit better with the ball. His game off the ball is really good. And he can really do a job for the team, as I'm already mentioned. But he needs to be slightly better in his distribution. He needs to be slightly better in his dribbling. And I'm not saying he's bad by any means, but to take that next step, that's where he needs to evolve, and that's where he needs to work on. And that's completely my opinion on this. But I think for me, he'd fit perfectly into the Spanish game if he can build that on the ball aspect of his game.
Yeah, I don't want to underrate Cremaschi, because I do think that he
Not at
is
all.
better on the ball than we're giving him credit for. He hasn't had a ton of games to start, and when he has this year, he has been able to make an impact. And going back to last year, in the first half of the season, Cremaschi was a lot of the time our most creative player on the ball, and our best chance to create goal scoring opportunities came through Benjamin Cremaschi. So
And
I don't want to lose sight of that. I'll also say, I don't know about the Spanish league. I actually think he also has a Premier League future. Unlike Diego Gomez, he doesn't have above average Premier League athletic traits, but I do think he has average Premier League athletic traits. I do think he has the body to fit into that league. And so for me, the perfect path, and I don't know if I have a perfect path for anyone else, but what I would love to see for Benjamin Cremaschi is another year and a half at Inter Miami, get him 100, 120 games at the professional level. And then I would love to see him move to PSV, which has recruited a lot of young Americans over the last 18 months and has done a phenomenal job with those young Americans, and get him in the Dutch Eredivisie to continue that development at a slightly higher level. You talk about upping the technical ability for Cremaschi. He's going to have to do that in the Dutch league, and he'll have be in an environment where they'll be ball dominant and one of the best teams in the league, and he will be forced to develop that part of his game. And then give him 2 years there. At that point, he'll still only be 22. He'll be what Diego Gomez is now. And then he can move from one of the best clubs in the Eredivisie to the Premier League, or a Bundesliga club or whatever, or even La Liga, maybe, if that's where it ends up taking him. To me, that's like the perfect plan for him. And I do know that the U.S. program loves him. I do know that Ernie Stewart, who's the current sporting director for PSV, has had a large part to play with the U.S. Soccer over the last couple of years. And so I'm sure he's very familiar with Benjamin Cremaschi. And so I would not be surprised, and I think it would be amazing if Cremaschi would leave Inter Miami to go to a level of that quality. My opinion.
that's actually a really good pathway. And the more I think about it, I feel like Benjamin Cremaschi hasn't necessarily been, and this can come across the wrong way, so I want to phrase it correctly, but we haven't seen the best of Cremaschi this season, and that's not because of Cremaschi as a player or his form, but just because what the team is being asked to do, right? We haven't been playing with the ball as much since Messi has been injured away from the team. A lot of our gameplay has been fast counter-attacking football, winning the ball high up, and getting the ball into getting the ball in the right spots, and then moving on counter transitions to try and create opportunities. Cremaschi can do that. He can do that really, really well. I think he definitely fits into the best midfield to be able to achieve that goal of counter transition. But I do think there's an aspect of Benjamin Cremaschi's game that we're not able to see because the style that we're playing. And you might be completely right that his technicality will come through when we play a little bit more possession-based football. But yeah, I like the pathway that you've picked for him. The Dutch league is fantastic in terms of its technicality, and really good growth opportunity for some of these young players. And if he can get to do that, that would be great. And again, guys, this is just a hypothetical. This is how we would view their future. So come and speculate with us, because this is a world of fantasy and there's no tax in dreaming, right?
Yeah, I see some comments in the chat about Gomez being a much better player than Cremaschi. I will just remind you that Cremaschi has not had a ton of opportunity this year to show who he really is. And this time a year ago, Cremaschi was a better player than Diego Gomez. Gomez has had a phenomenal jump in his ability and his, output and his ability to impact games. And that's amazing. And we're really happy and proud for him. But, Cremaschi was better than him a year ago and is also 3 years younger than him. So just something to keep.
And we don't want to start a conversation of this player is better than this player. It's just putting certain things in perspective. And of course, if it's not evident already, we have a certain soft spot for homegrown players, and Cremaschi is a homegrown player. So it's always going to be the case.
We probably should have said this at the beginning. We have an incredible Inter Miami bias, so we are probably overrating all of our players.
Hey, we recognize all our biases, guys. We recognize all our biases.
That's our disclaimer.
Yeah.
Let's get to another player that I think is not long for Inter Miami. I do think is going to make the move over to Europe in the next 12 months, and that's Federico Redondo. He came to Inter Miami, I think was a very high profile signing for Inter Miami. I think a lot of people thought he was going to head directly to Europe from Argentina. He came, he wanted to play with Messi. He wanted to play with Busquets. He has often been compared to a young Busquets. I don't know, now that we've gotten a chance to see him up close, if that's exactly what he is. You can see why people would make that comparison. He's long. He is good on the ball. But to me, he feels more like an 8. But of course, there's a long time for him to develop, and he'll get into a club and sort of find his position as he gets older. What do you think the future holds for Federico Redondo, and what do you think he has to do before he can make that move?
I think Redondo can actually spend another year at Inter Miami just to develop. I think this has been his breakthrough season. Yes, he was bought in for a lot of money. He was forced to start immediately as soon as he came on, just by virtue of what we saw in him as a signing. And that's all well and good. I think he has a lot of promise, very good player. You've already mentioned he's good on the ball. I don't think number 6 is his position right now, especially with the way the modern game is developing. I don't know if he has the skill sets to play that number 6 role, but he looks good in a number 8 position. Runs his butt off throughout the game. You often see him being really tired by the end of the game, and that's because he works really hard, puts in the effort, can finish goals, can create passes. Some of his passing has been really good, as demonstrated by that assist that he created for Diego Gomez against, I forget which team it was, but that was a really good assist. That was very much Busquets-like. But his positioning is not there, and that's, again, I think quite evident with the way that we've seen him play. Sometimes he tends to drift away. His positional discipline is not entirely up to par. Give him one more season at Inter Miami. Let him be that linchpin midfielder to take on that responsibility of being the sole creator of the ball. And I could see him develop into a really good player for sure.
Yeah, the tools are there. You watch him and you can see the tools. I do wonder if clubs in Europe are going to see the tools and say, we can fix the mental part, we can fix the possessioning. And then he gets there, he makes the big move, and then they realize it's a little harder, and maybe they wish they had bought him a year later after he had, like, they didn't want to be the team that had to suffer through the growing pains. I hope that doesn't end up being the case. When we bought him, I thought he was going to be a little bit more developed than he was. I thought he was going to be, I'll be honest, I thought when we bought him, he was going to be the best player on our team that wasn't a former Barcelona player. Like, I thought he was going to step in and be like a DP, like super impactful defensive midfielder that was going to come in and like transform our team. And he hasn't been that. You can argue where he is on the pecking order. He's certainly a player that has been good. It's not like he's been bad. It's not like he's been awful. It's not like he deserves to get benched for the rest of the season. But he hasn't been that guy, which means he needs more time. We saw Diego Gomez make a tremendous jump from year 1 to year 2. Redondo is living in a different country. For the first time, he's living in a country that's not English, or is not a Spanish-speaking country. So there's more development to be had, and I think that that's going to mean Redondo's not leaving in January like Diego Gomez could. Right? He's not there yet. Next summer, I think it's a possibility. I would be surprised if it's much longer than that, because I do think he wants to get on with the next part of his career. But we'll see. For him, it's about the mental game. It's about getting into the film room and just being in the right position at the right time, and watching Redondo play, and then watching like a Yannick Bright play, who just has instinctually, you see it, you see it's like it's the little things in the game that he has to iron out. And that will come with game time. It will come with watching back on film. It will come with talking to veterans on how they see the game. It will come with working with the coaching staff on how to improve. But ultimately, I think the tools are there and he's going to get that move eventually. Where do you see him as like an ideal fit for him?
Okay, time for me to do that little exercise. So
Yeah,
for me, the perfect scenario is Redondo stays on a year more. I can truly see him be that midfielder.
Wait, hold on. Before I let you go, is it better to move him on in January as opposed to next summer? Because if he goes next summer, he's going to leave us in the middle of the year. We might not be able to replace him.
Yeah, but I still think for his personal development, I don't think he should go in.
You're right. That shouldn't be a consideration. I apologize.
Yeah, I think for Inter Miami's selfish reasons, yes, potentially losing him earlier, so that we have the opportunity to replace him would be a good way to look at it. But I think he stays on a year longer. Next year, I'm not sure where Sergio Busquets is head at. Is he going to continue to play a full 90-minute role for this Inter Miami team? Does he take a little bit of a step back? I think Redondo grows into this player, bulks up a little bit, builds up his tactical acumen a little bit, becomes more comfortable around his teammates in the city of Miami, in the environment that he's in. And I think Francisco mentions here that strange thing about Redondo having his pedigree with his dad and his grandfather, but tactically he should be very sound. Yeah, but it's also the environment that you're in, the players that you're playing around. Sometimes it takes longer to adapt. I think once he adapts, he becomes, Super Saiyan Federico Redondo.
And the other thing is the Spanish league and in Argentina, very similar styles of soccer. The MLS and the Premier League and Bundesliga, very different styles of soccer, and so requires different aspects of your game, and the great players will develop. So I think this will make Redondo a better player for having gone through this, but you can understand why there'd be a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. So the next step for him, I know he would want to go to a Spanish team, but for me, I think he should go to the Serie A. Fit him in a team like Milan or Inter or Juventus, where the playing style is a little bit slow. I think he fits there perfectly. Build up a little bit more, get that experience, become that experienced, well-rounded footballer, having played in the Argentinian league, having played in the Italian style of football, then take the next step to a team like, Atletico Madrid or some team in Spain. I know his aspirations would 100% be Real Madrid. Don't know if his ceiling is that high, but I hope it is. I do think Redondo has a lot of potential, a lot of growing up to do still, but he's capable of doing it, and I can definitely see him go through the Serie A into the Spanish league.
How much do you need to sell him for if you're in Miami?
More than you bought him for, that's for sure. I think we bought double the profits, right?
Well, okay, but we bought him for $8.5 million, and I'm sure that Argentinos kept a sell-on clause. So let's assume, like Diego Gomez, it was 50%. That means, 17 million valuation. It probably wasn't that much. It was probably more like 12 million total valuation. But like, if you sell him for 15 million, you're only getting a $2 million profit. So it almost feels like for this player, because you invested so much into him, $8.5 million, right? That's 3 times what they spent on Diego Gomez. You almost have to get like at least a $5 to $10 million profit, which means you have to sell him for 20 to 25 million. And if you are talking about selling this player for 20 to 25 million, you're really narrowing the number of clubs that can afford to buy this player. And if we are talking about a player that's not Premier League style, you're really cutting down the number of teams, because we know the Premier League has so much money. And so you talk about the Serie A. I don't like, is he ready to go to a club in the big 5 or 6 clubs in the Serie A? Is he ready to go to a Napoli? Is he ready to go to an AC Milan? Or does he need to go to another stopgap club first? And if that's the case, what kind of club can actually afford him? I think this is a very interesting conversation with Federico Redondo, because it feels like there's going to be a small subsection of clubs where they can afford him, but that he's like ready to go in and contribute, and they're going to think he's a good enough prospect to impact their team. I don't really know what other people think of his ceiling as. Certainly you watch Diego Gomez for Inter Miami and you can see that he is so impactful, and Redondo hasn't quite been that. So do Real Madrid, do Barcelona, do Atletico Madrid, do AC Milan, do Juventus see this guy as a player that they can bring in and within a year he's going to be a starter for them? And if not, they're not going to spend 30 million on him. How many teams are? You know what I mean? So this is a very interesting situation.
Yeah, but I do think
I
do think there's a world in which we break even on him. So we may not make the maximum profit, sell him for maybe like 15 million. If there's a sell on clause for Argentinos, give them the money, and then have a future sell on clause included in the deal, so that if he moves on, okay, so if he goes to a team like Fiorentina or Roma, and then he develops into a player that's capable of going to the Napoli's, the AC Milan's, the Inter,
and listen, Roma and Fiorentina I consider like in the top tier of.
Yeah, but they're still not the cream of the cream, right? So yeah,
even at that level, is he ready for that, or is he going to be ready for that?
I think he might be, but I might be too optimistic. We'll see. Maybe we're just hyping up our players way too much, man. Maybe they just end up at another MLS club. That's going to be so disappointing.
No, he's definitely not going to end up at another MLS club. He's going to push for the move because this is what he wants. And this was always the plan with him. And it's just like we talk about Diego Gomez. You have to let him go because you don't want future potential signings to think you're not going to help them achieve what they want. But it is just interesting. I think that one's going to be a little tough because once you start getting over that 12 to 15 million range, the number of clubs that can actually afford you really starts to shrink, especially if they don't see you as a guy that's going to come in and be a starter right away. So I don't know, a very interesting conversation. If you are
just a final word on Redondo, you know what my inkling is? He's going to end up going to like a La Liga team, like Real Sociedad or Real Valladolid, or however you pronounce that. And I think that's going to be his preferred destination. I apologize. Spanish is not my language of knowledge. And Scotty is laughing at me because he apparently knows better than me. So there you
go. Well, I was just looking at the La Liga table or to see the teams in La Liga, right? Maybe a Girona, club that's connected to Manchester City. You could see that being something. Real Sociedad, Real Betis, I guess they would have the money for this, but it's a step up, and I don't know if there's a next step for him beyond that goes to either the Real Madrids of the world. I agree with you though. If he could find his way to Serie A, that would be perfect for him. Let's go to the next one. And this is okay. So those three are like the obvious candidates, right? I think beyond that, it gets a little bit more projection, a little bit more if they develop this aspect of the game, a little more of if a club identifies something they really like in this player. So let's start with Yannick Bright. He has gone from a player that had barely played for us that I was saying could be our star for the next 10 years to playing for us, and now me worrying that he's going to be gone in the next 2 years. He is a little bit older. He's 22 now. So if he wants to make the move to Europe, it's going to have to be on this rookie contract. He's not going to be able to sign an extension with Inter Miami that's going to pay him significantly more, or he's going to be locked in for quite some time into the MLS. And so, and yet he has that refined veteran style skill set in a six that is so hard to develop, and he just has it as a 22-year-old. And even though he's not as athletic as a Diego Gomez, he's a fine athlete. He's got good enough size to operate anywhere. Am I getting out over my skis about Yannick Bright, or is this becoming a more real conversation every time we watch him play the game?
It's really interesting because I think we are going through our rose-tinted Yannick Bright glasses era where everything he does is just pure gold for us. But that being said, dude, I think he's more ready than a lot of the players that we have on this list. I'll be honest.
I agree.
He is very close to being ready. And I know we had this conversation earlier offline where I don't think I made a passing comment about how Yannick Bright might not be with this team for too much longer. And you mentioned he's going to be here for 10 years. And I don't know if he will, man. I don't know if he will. He just, okay, there's, in terms of the pathway, what he needs to do. For me, the only missing piece of his game, and this is not a deficiency in his play, but something that he hasn't necessarily needed to demonstrate, is his passing vision. He keeps it very simple, he keeps it very basic, and that's all well and good.
I think you've seen enough from him to say that it's in there and that it's just a matter of like game time.
Exactly. And I think it just depends on which team he's in, right? Because certain teams like to play a certain style of football. So if you put him in a team that needs more passing, I think he can do a job.
Okay, just because we're having too much fun with this conversation, I'm going to speed up a little bit. But tell me, what does he need to do to earn a move, and where would you like to see him go if he gets a move?
I think he's ready, man. I think he plays another year for Inter Miami when he's 24. I think he's ready to make that jump, maybe even earlier. I think next summer you can see him go. I don't think he goes in January. I think he might want to spend a little bit longer with this team because there is a universe in which Yannick Bright is the most important midfielder for Inter Miami for the next 10 years. But in an alternate universe, give him the German league, man. We haven't spoken about the German league. Give him the German league.
You know what the thing is? So everyone needs a really good 6. Even Inter Miami needed a really good number 6. And so he can fit anywhere. Is he an elite athlete at the top level of the Premier League? No. And that's okay. But like anywhere else, man, and even in the Premier League, just not at that top level, you could see it.
Bro, imagine him on a wet, rainy Sunday at Stoke, just bossing the midfield, barging people with his shoulder tackles. Championship. Send him to the Championship. I think he's going to be phenomenal in the Championship.
He's better than that. He doesn't need to go to the Championship.
The Championship is the best league in the world, by the way. In terms of how much fun you have watching that league, it's the most fun. Might not be the best quality, but it's the most fun. And I do think...
You know what the Championship is? It is the closest thing to American football that exists in soccer. That's what it is.
I hate myself because I actually understand what you mean. That's the worst part. I know exactly what you mean. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I think he'll thrive in the Championship. Go to the Premier League a couple of times with the club that he's in. Get relegated again. I think he's going to be a very important piece for a lot of teams. And I can see him. I think this is one of the players that I can see fit in multiple leagues. Italian league, I think he can do a really good job. We don't necessarily see his ilk players in the Italian league because he's not necessarily silky, smooth.
And the thing with Bright,
they don't use the defensive midfielder the same way as someone in the UK might.
Dude, I can see him playing in Italy too, though, just because of the culture fit and everything. The thing is, though, he's a draft pick, so you don't have a requirement for how much money you have to make out of him. We had that conversation with Redondo. We'll have it again in the next couple minutes with a couple other players. But because Yannick Bright, you didn't invest a ton to get him, you don't have to get a lot in return for him. And that opens up a lot of clubs for, potential options for him. I see you laughing. You have a comment before we move to our next player?
No, I think we can move. I was just reading the comments.
Okay. Let's go to Toto Aviles. He's on the younger side. I think he just turned 20 last month, or rather this month. So more in the Cremaschi role than some of the other guys who are, 2 years older. He's obviously expecting to go to Europe. He came to Inter Miami to showcase himself for Europe. He is a center back and has great tools, is athletic, tall. He needs to improve in his ability to play out of the back, but certainly you can play in Europe with what he is now if you find the right move. Similar to the conversation about Redondo, you spent $7 million on this player. You have to get 10 plus million in return. And so how many teams are going to pay for this for a 20-year-old center back that is not particularly refined? I will also say 20-year-old center backs are very rare in the world in terms of guys that have started 50 plus games, or started by the time we get to next summer, 80 games. What are you thinking about Toto, who is also a controversial figure right now because of some of his more glaring mental mistakes.
He needs to get on that Leon Goretzka diet, bulk up a little bit, put some juice in his body, and also start to do Sudoku puzzles every day because his temperament is quite bad. That's what he needs to do. Other than that, I think he's good enough to move to a team that doesn't necessarily love to play out from the back. There are teams in the world who don't use the Pep Guardiola style of football, teams that I love to watch. And there's no harm in having an Everton popping the ball long straight to their striker. So he'll need to find a team where his play style fits. I agree with you in the sense that he's not necessarily the best ball playing centre back, and he might not fit the best in teams that love to play out from the back. But I can see him go to a mid-tier to a low-tier Spanish team in a year maybe.
Can I? Actually, this wouldn't work. Never mind. How would you feel about this? A swap deal for Cesar Montes and Toto Aviles to Almeria, which is now in the second division, so that's why this wouldn't work. But if they get promoted next summer, for example, Almeria gets a young, bright, talented Argentinian center back who's got 80 games under his belt, which is, again, very rare for a center back. And Inter Miami gets the sort of refined veteran, but still in their prime star center back that they could want. And, we're talking about 10, 12, $14 million value. You could see the values line up there. I don't know, just thinking, like, as you said, a mid to lower, a mid-table Spanish club feels like they could invest in this kid, especially if they thought of him as their third center back for the first year or two to develop into one of their two starting center backs. That feels like the path for Aviles. Here's what I will say. I think he's the most likely, besides for Diego Gomez, to leave in January, for this to happen in January.
That early?
Yeah, because I know we can see the things he has to refine. We can see the things he has to get better at. But teams are going to see the tools, and they're going to see the experience, and they're going to say, man, we have a 20-year-old in our B team that we're not even really that sure about, and we don't even like. And this kid's already starting in the MLS and has 80 games under his belt. That feels like that could happen. And I also wouldn't be surprised if Miami would be fine with that because they think they can, that it's time to get the next player. And so that wouldn't surprise me.
I think Miami might already be looking at that. And honestly, his performances haven't been bad at all, in the way that the conversation around him right now is slightly controversial, as you said, because of his red card decisions, yellow card decisions, tackles, all of that. But overall, his play style has been pretty decent. He has done well. And we've mentioned a couple of times, but every time we rewatch a game, he seems to be a lot better than he really was in the first watch. So I think he is capable of leaving in January. But I don't see him going beyond that mid to low tier Spanish team. I think his preference would be the Spanish league again, but I don't think he's going to go beyond that, at least at this point in time. He needs to develop a bit further.
Yeah. Well, could you see a club like Villarreal or Real Betis, or like a club that's competing for like a Europa League spot in Spain, buying him and saying, this is our number 3 center back, and just developing him to a starter in two or 3 years down the line? That to me is what I see. And then they would have 10 million to spend on this player. Okay, Let's get to the next one because we're not even halfway. Ian Frey, an amazing player when he's on the pitch. Huge injury concerns, huge injury question marks. And in fact, of any player on the list, this Ian Frey might be the guy that people say, no, like he's just not even on he's not on our list because of the injury concerns. But man, when he's on the field, it is exciting and it is special.
Ian Frey without injury goes to the biggest clubs in Europe.
Ian Frey is already gone if he never gets hurt.
Ian Frey without injury plays for a top 5 league. He's top 5 team in any top 5 leagues, right? He is phenomenal as a player. His skill set is amazing. His ability on the ball is amazing. His defense is really good. I'm not sure if he's a right back or center back. That's something maybe that needs to be determined. But overall, phenomenal player. Ian Frey without injury is great. Ian Frey with injury, I don't think he leaves the MLS. I'll be honest.
I think the first thing for him is to go through all of next season as a healthy player and as a guy that's going to start 25 plus games, because the injury concerns are going to be a concern until he proves that they're not. And even, we do this podcast and we talk about Ian Frey, and almost every single time someone says, yeah, but you got to be worried about his health. You got to make sure he's healthy. You got to make sure he's not hurting himself. Like, no one's going to buy him if that is a concern. And so until he gets over that, it's going to be a concern. And how do you get over that? By just staying healthy for years at a time. And so for Ian Frey, that means, play all of next season, earn a spot as a starter. And then you've put the injury concerns behind you. It's been years. You have figured out what stretches or stability exercises or muscle strengthening you need to do to get your knees healthy. And then you can start having this conversation. But, oh man, dude, if he could do that, the sky is the limit. I think
the biggest what if on this Inter Miami roster.
I have said this for a long time. Well, basically since last year when he broke out and we really got a chance to see him. I think if he never tore his ACL for the first time, he would have been on the U.S. national team's Copa America roster this year. And as a 22-year-old, that is incredibly high praise. The other 22-year-old on the U.S. roster to do that is Chris Richards, who plays at Crystal Palace. Is going to be a starter for them this year. That could have been Ian Frey if he, and honestly, maybe not as much of a defensive monster as Chris Richards can be or would be in the MLS, but with the ball, way better. Possibly the second best. I don't want to over exaggerate, but like on the ball, he might be a top 5 American center back in the world right now. Is his future as a right back? That I do think really lowers the potential, because so many more right backs can do that type of thing. But it's so much fun to dream about his potential. And if you talked about the Pep Guardiola style center backs or those types of clubs wanting guys that can play out of the back that are comfortable on the ball. Ian Frey can do that, man. So
he could be a Brighton player easily, like a Brighton starter if he is the player that we think he is.
Yeah, and I don't know. I would probably avoid the Premier League if I was him, or even English soccer if I was him, because it's so physical and again, the health concerns, right? So, but yeah, you get him in the French league, man. You get him on like Nice or Marseille or like one of the better French clubs. Could be a lot of fun. Could be a lot of fun.
Tom says if his crystal ball is clean, Frey will see more playtime when Cello's loan is over. Tom, I really hope you've got your duster ready to clean that crystal ball, because I can't wait for that day to come.
Yeah, well, let's hope Cello's loan doesn't result in him being here for the next 5 years, if it's going to get in the way of Ian Frey's development. Okay, let's talk about another player who Inter Miami spent a lot of money to bring in, and that's Facu Farias. We haven't seen him all season, so you may have forgotten what he actually is as a player. It was his second ACL tear, so another player that has injury question marks. Inter Miami, certainly when they bought him, thought he was going to go to Europe, probably around the same time as Diego Gomez. And in fact, I think when we bought him, he was the most polished of the 3 guys we got last summer. ACL injury, lost season, missed season. He's going to come back and play a lot for us next year if he's still here. Do you think he's like, what do you see? Because I don't think he wants to be in the MLS for the next 10 years. And so I don't know, man. The Farias conversation is interesting. What does his future look like? He's another player that I don't know if Inter Miami wouldn't be willing to move on from in January, just because like it's going to be a long road to get him where he wants to be. So they might say, hey, listen, if you want to go to Spain now and we can find a club that it works for you, let's move it now, because you're now 23. And like, if that's something you want to do, now might be the time to go.
And a lot of these conversations that I think about it depend on where Inter Miami finishes the season and what the result of the season is. Because if we don't win, then our thought process might actually be, okay, we need to move some of these players on, because we can't afford to lose another season of Lionel Messi being here in Inter Miami and not winning a trophy. So what you just mentioned towards the end, where we're like, okay, you know what, it's going to take long for him to come back into form. We can't afford that much time. We need to improve on this position. They may let him go early. But I think for Facundo Farias, as of this point in time, he will need to spend another year at Inter Miami to be able to prove that he's able to play at the same level and is able to compete at the same level after his injury. And then I can see him moving on to Spain or Italy or somewhere, wherever he prefers. But unless Inter Miami forces him out, I think the best route for him would be to stay on for another year, get fit fully, prove your worth in the team, get the minutes in the legs, and then after a year, you can consider.
I also wonder if I do think there's a chance he gets moved to another MLS team, because Inter Miami's going to have Robert Taylor. They're going to have Messi. They're going to have Julian Gressel. Probably won't have Matías Rojas, but there's going to be a lot of wingers.
Matías Rojas as well. I don't think he's going to. If Tata Martino stays on, I think he's going to keep Matías Rojas.
I think so too. I don't know if the money's going to work there, and he is a free agent, so we'll see. So I don't know. Like, if Orlando, sorry, not Orlando City. I apologize. If Atlanta comes to you and says, "Hey, we have a spot for starting right winger or a starting left winger, and we think Farias will be the right player, and we'll take this burden off of you, and we'll give you part of the sell-on clause when we sell him, so that he can do his development here, where he isn't under pressure to be a champion from day one, which he will be at Inter Miami, and we can bring him back slowly and sort of work him." Like, I wonder if there's a path there. But he's a really good player, and I thought he was going to have a huge season this year. So we'll see. Let's move a little bit lower down the expectation list to two players that also came out of the academy. We think the world of Ian Frey and Benja Cremaschi is two guys that, especially Cremaschi, has a move to Europe in their future. But I don't hear the same chatter about Noah Allen and David Ruiz. We can have this conversation together, or we can talk about them separately. But Noah Allen, once a U.S. Youth International, under 19, under consideration for the under 20 World Cup roster, but he was a left back. And that is his natural profile. Like, that's what he physically profiles as. He's not going to move to Europe as a center back. That's not going to happen. He's not going to move to Europe as a left winger. Like, those aren't in the cards for him. But as a left back, that's where his highest ceiling is. But unfortunately, this year almost feels like a lost year in terms of his fullback development. What do you want to see for Noah Allen moving forward, if he wants to make that move? And that's sort of where this ends up.
It's hard because we haven't seen enough of Noah Allen to be like, this is what he needs to improve on and this is what he needs to work on. Whenever he's been given an opportunity, he's played well enough in the last couple of months for us to be like, hey, he's a good backup.
Yeah, but we haven't seen him as a left back. We haven't seen him in the left back since the beginning.
I don't think he works as a centre back in modern football in Europe.
No, certainly not.
Even as a left back, the way the game is going with these centre back, left backs that have been, brought into the world of Pep Guardiola and Mikel Arteta, where they play centre backs who are playing essentially like a Guardiola position, right? I'm not sure where Noah Allen fits, but again, the point is that not all teams play like that. I don't think he's going to move to Europe anytime soon, at least. I think he still has a little bit of developing to do. He needs to be a first-team player in an MLS team first. I don't think he leaves into Miami, but he's going to spend a couple of years here trying to establish himself before we see what the next move for him is.
You know what I want to see? And I'm a little disappointed. Not disappointed, but for him, I'm a little disappointed that the club still has Franco Negri, because I thought Negri was a very clear and obvious trade candidate this summer, and that would open up a spot for Noah Allen to be the legitimate number 2 left back behind Jordi Alba. And I think for Noah Allen, the goal has to be that the day Jordi Alba leaves Inter Miami, you just inherit the left back spot. And as third choice, he's not going to get the opportunity to prove that he's the guy. And so I think for him, the best case scenario is that Franco Negri moves on this winter, and that he is the number 2 left back next year. Jordi Alba is at Inter Miami and is the starter, but that he gets time, he gets rotation minutes, he starts 10 to 12 games at left back, and then he proves that when Jordi Alba does leave, whether it's after next year or after the following year or whatever, that Noah Allen's going to be the starter at left back for Inter Miami, and then he can, blossom into a true professional left back, and then from there, you can see him making a move. Listen, Caleb Wiley from Atlanta, who has played a lot and has started a lot of games for Atlanta, just made the move to Chelsea and then to Strasbourg. Now, I get everyone goes to Chelsea, but
I'm pretty sure you and I can go to Chelsea, right?
Yeah, why can't Noah Allen go? But
Todd
I guess the
Bowley is
difference
knocking on my door, mate. Chelsea wants a podcaster.
Yeah. The difference is that Caleb Wiley's played a lot of soccer, and even though I do think he has a little bit more top-end speed, I don't know if he has a ton more talent than Noah Allen, like overall talent. And so it's just a matter of like he has to play. And so he has to move up to number 2 left back next season if that's what he wants to do. So that's the Noah Allen conversation. What about David Ruiz? A guy that I don't think a lot of people have connected to Europe, but he is a Honduras international. He is going to emerge as a key member of that national team. And I don't know, I don't know if he has
I can answer it for you. I don't think he's going to go to Europe. And
Okay,
if he does,
on.
it's not going to be the best team, or not going to be like a good European.
Well, let me stop you, because he's very young. He's very young. And he's already been better than people expected him to be when he got to this level. So there is, I think, upside for David Ruiz. He has the athletic profile to play at a higher level. And we just haven't seen him play a ton of minutes this year, as opposed to last year where he played more and he looked better. I agree with you. I think he needs to turn himself.
Sorry, you know what this conversation's like finally giving me an idea of is that Tata Martino isn't good for our youth players.
Okay, so this is part of the David Ruiz conversation. David Ruiz can't move to Europe unless, at least into a better club in Europe, unless he becomes a starter for Inter Miami. And what is the pathway for David Ruiz to become a starter at Inter Miami? It feels very difficult for him to get there because the club is going to try and bring in these players that are going to in the midfield that are going to help them win the MLS Cup now, at least as long as Messi's here and the Barcelona guys are here. And so can David Ruiz position himself so that the minute that Cremaschi leaves, Inter Miami has a midfield of Yannick Bright, David Ruiz, and insert U22 number 10 of the future, like a stud 21-year-old number 10 from Argentina, partnered with David Ruiz and Yannick Bright. Like, can he position himself to become that guy the minute Messi leaves and become a starter in the MLS? And if he can't, maybe there is a move for him to like the English Championship. Maybe not the championship, but like not Denmark. Okay, I think you guys are just being mean now, but
no, Wrexham would be a great shout for him. I think Wrexham's going to be in the championship in the next couple of years.
I'll be honest, I have never watched a Wrexham game, so I apologize. But like, is there a mid-table Dutch club that he can go to? Is there a lower, like a bottom table, like a second half of the table German club that could see something in him? Like, and then if you're him, would you rather go there and just start your European development process as opposed to waiting 2 years to try and then earn a starting spot at Inter Miami? So it's not necessarily that he's going to blossom and get signed by AC Milan, next. Like, I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that maybe for David Ruiz, there's a pathway for him to go to Europe sooner instead of waiting till get his chance at Inter Miami. Or does David Ruiz become a 10-year Inter Miami player? And we talk about that with so many guys, but David Ruiz definitely feels like a guy that if he wants to be at Inter Miami, could be here for the next decade.
There's another conversation within this conversation, and I feel like we can go on about 2 hours for this, right? At what point does it become better for some of these players to stay on at Inter Miami and build a legacy here than actually go to a lower or a mid-tier Dutch or Italian league team and sort of get lost in the wind there, right? At what point does that come into calculus for them? Because If they can stay on it, if David Ruiz can stay on it into Miami for another 3 years, become an established starter, he wouldn't want to leave, especially if Inter Miami is one of the best teams in the MLS at that point. And if we continue to, build in the same way that we are right now, do you think his ambitions of playing in Europe would then, take him away? Yeah, that's another conversation to be had.
But if you're him, and we have never talked to David Ruiz, we have no idea what he wants to do in his life. So maybe he just thinks Inter Miami is the greatest club in the world, and he wants to be
that's my point, right? That's my point. What's their calculus thinking here as well?
But we have assumed every other player on this list wants to go play for Real Madrid or Manchester United or Manchester City or Juventus or whatever. So if that is David Ruiz's goal and he thinks there's a 0.5% chance that's going to happen, like maybe there is a better path for him in a mid-table Dutch club or a mid-table Belgian club or a, Austrian club. And then you're in Europe, you're in the ecosystem, you're a part of the much more intuitive scouting departments for all these clubs that are spending a lot more time in those leagues, right? It just wouldn't surprise me, especially because if you're David Ruiz and you're looking at Inter Miami, you're probably projecting at least 2 years before you can become a real locked-in starter on a week-to-week basis. So,
yeah, a club like Getafe or again Real Betis could potentially use a utility player.
That might be a little high for him. I'm talking down a rung or two. But again, if you do that, right? If you go to the Netherlands, all of a sudden you're getting scouted week in, week out by the PSVs and the Ajaxes, and even like the lower teams in the Premier League and the lower teams in the Bundesliga. They're watching the Eredivisie for talent all the time, whereas they're probably not watching the MLS. And so you kind of get yourself into a new sphere of scouts.
Honestly, even the Norwegian league is picking up a lot now. Like there's a lot of scouting happening in the Norwegian league and the Belgian league as well. So you're right in that sense that if you want a pathway, there's a lot more opportunity in Europe to be able to do that. So
something to keep in mind. 2 older players that I wanted to mention, and these are our last 2, and then we'll wrap it up. We've already gone way longer than we expected to. But number 1, Drake Callender. As a goalkeeper, being a little older is fine because the development curve for goalkeepers is much steeper, or takes longer, and the prime is later and stuff. So you have much more time for the development process. He's now 26, so he is getting to the point where it's going to be now or never over the next 2 or 3 transfer windows. Do you think he ends up making the move to Europe? If so, what level do you think he could go to? And then the third question is, what does he need to do in order to make that move?
I think this conversation is slightly different in terms of where they'll end up for a goalkeeper. There are deficiencies in Drake Callender's abilities as a keeper, right? He's not the best with his feet. Again, the conversation about how the modern game is developing and how every keeper now needs to be good at his feet. But I think he could be a fantastic third choice keeper in a really good European team, or even a second choice goalkeeper in a really good European team. And once he gets into that role, he can then start to establish, play in that environment, learn, build up some of his skills that he might not have, and make the move to maybe a mid to a lower level European team, but as a starter goalkeeper.
Let me add some context to this. A couple years ago, Matt Turner went from the New England Revolution to Arsenal to be Arsenal's backup. And he got a huge pay raise and was a $3 million transfer. And he was never intended to be Arsenal's future goalkeeper. He was there to be a backup because every team needs a backup, right?
Yeah.
It's an incredible move, man, going to Arsenal. Drake Callender is like, I think, an 85th to 90th percentile in terms of his shot stopping ability. And that season that Matt Turner earned that move, he was like 99th percentile shot stopping. So Drake Callender definitely has to go the next step in order to make that kind of move. Could Middlesbrough spend $1 million on him and he could be a star in the English Championship?
Yeah, I would. I can see that happen.
Is that interesting? If you're Drake,
under Michael Carrick style, maybe not, but maybe another English championship. I know, another English championship team.
If you're a
Leeds United,
Borussia Mönchengladbach, Would you bring him in to compete for a starting goalkeeper job?
I'm not sure if Gladbach goes for American keepers, but I can definitely see that happening. Sorry,
Okay,
you keep
sorry.
picking these
A
teams.
bottom half of the table Bundesliga team.
Yes, I do see that 100%.
And if you're Drake, I think if you get that opportunity,
Cologne.
if you are Drake, I think if you get that opportunity, you have to go. Now, I don't think you're right. Those two clubs probably aren't searching the U.S. for goalkeeping talent, although Middlesbrough did just get an American in Aiden Morris to come. So maybe they have bigger eyes on this market than we think. But if you're Drake and you want to go be a European goalkeeper and have a chance to one day go be a Premier League goal or whatever, like I think you have to make that move. And I think it has to happen in the next 3 windows, or he's going to be an MLS lifer, which would be great for Inter Miami.
I think he fits in really well in the championship, honestly.
Okay, last one. Leo Campana. Inter Miami brought him in from Wolves. He is Ecuadorian, but he spent the final years of his development at Wolves, did a couple loans in at least one in Switzerland. And then Inter Miami bought him because Wolves decided he was not a Premier League player as a 22-year-old. And so they sold him for $3.5 million to Inter Miami, where he was going to get an opportunity to be a first choice starting striker that Inter Miami was going to develop into one of the best players in the league. And of course, Inter Miami has just gone on to bring in a bunch of other strikers to compete with him and never given him that role, understandably in the case of Luis Suarez. That said, do you think he has ambitions to go back to Europe? And if he does, I think he has the talent and the tools to do that. Should that be his ambition? It's just a matter of if that move would ever make sense for Inter Miami, who did, again, spend $3.5 million on him.
I think so. And there are a couple of leagues. We have spoken about the Dutch league. I think he might do really well in the Dutch league, by the way. Yeah. Put him in Feyenoord. I think he's going to be good. One league that we haven't spoken
English
about.
Championship, dude.
I think he's big, strong. I think conversion rate is a little bit iffy, but if he continues to get game time, I don't doubt he's going to be really good. Galatasaray, we haven't spoken about as a team that could potentially be a destination for some of these players. Fenerbahce, like the Turkish league, it's no joke, and it's still European. They could use a striker like Leo Campana. I can 100% see him be, fit in there.
I think, though, for this conversation to become real, it has to be Luis Suarez retiring and him being the number one striker next year.
Yeah.
And then he can do anything he wants.
You know what? The way things are going, if Inter Miami wins this, again, maybe not even win or lose, I think Luis Suarez hangs up his boots next season. I don't think he goes for another season. And that's when Drake Canada might really have a chance to show himself. The only issue would be if Inter Miami goes out and signs another... Campana, my bad. Goes out and signs another big-name striker.
I don't want to speculate on that because we don't know. We don't know. So if it happens, it happens, and we'll talk about it then. What I will say is, if that happens, I think they have to give Campana the starting striker role and bring up Brian Destin to be the backup who's with the B team, or Carmichael to be the backup who's with the B team, right? And just until the summer window, give it to Campana to just be the number one guy. And then if it's not working by the summer window, you can then go get someone from Europe to come in. But he just needs not just
playing time.
It's not just playing time. It's the confidence to say, we trust you to be our number one guy no matter what. And you're not going to get benched the minute our other guy comes back healthy or doesn't need rest or whatever.
Skrilla has just answered the question for you.
Okay. Skrilla says Miami would sign a new striker if Suarez retired because Tata doesn't trust Campana. I do wonder if there's a battle between what Tata trusts and what Chris Henderson trusts, because I think Chris Henderson has backed Campana every step of the way. And so we'll see. Guys, I just want to thank you all for being along for this ride. This episode went half an hour longer than we expected, so thank you for being here. And I just wanted to say that college football season starts in about 5 minutes. And so this will be the last episode of the Dry Pink Dialogue. We will not be returning, and we just appreciate you guys being along.
We'll be returning as an NFL podcast now.
We will be returning at the end of the national championship game in middle of January. And until then, I wish you all luck. No, we will be back after having watched a lot of college football over the next 72 hours.
Talk about yourself, mate. I'd rather
On
watch
Saturday.
badminton than college football.
I'm going to watch enough for the both of us. It's fine.
Okay.
We'll be back for the pregame show on Saturday, 1 hour before kickoff. It is an hour later than normal because we're playing at Chicago and that's Central Time. So just be aware it's an hour later than normal, but we will do the hour before kickoff. We'll be back for a post-game reaction. We'll do the recap. We'll do all that good stuff. And then Inter Miami will get a 2-week break, hopefully just 15 points away from breaking the all-time MLS record. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for being in the chat. We will see you next time. Have a wonderful day.